Welcome to the Game Dev Show. Today is going to be a slightly different episode. I think Story and Dave will be joining in just a few, but I actually got the battler for the giveaway up and running, so we can run that while we're talking and going over design patterns. Today's episode is going to be largely about design patterns. I wanted to talk about the command pattern with Harrison, but I'm not sure he's going to make it today, so we're going to talk about all different design patterns. If you have any design pattern specific questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat and we'll take them as we go along. And then other than that, if you want to enter to win a JetBrains rider code, just pick a race and a class there. They're listed up at the top. Type them into chat, and then we'll start the battle in like 15, 20 minutes or so, and then give it to whoever wins out of that. It's totally random. All you got to do is pick what you want to be. I think I picked a Dragon Warrior for mine. Let's turn off the help windows over there. Anyway, how's everybody doing today? Hopefully good. I forgot I'm here by myself. So yeah, anyway, today I wanted to talk about design patterns specifically because of Harrison's book here, this Learning Design Patterns with Unity. And I've been reading through it. I already know all of the design patterns in here, but I've been skimming through and taking a look at the different examples and seeing what stuff I found really useful and beneficial in here. And out of all of them, I still feel that the command pattern is probably the most useful and the most powerful outside of like the observer and singleton patterns. Hey, Dave, how's it going?
Well, I just had to remember how to set this up.
Good to see you. Yeah. Yeah, good seeing you here. I think Story will be joining in a second. Yeah, it was just talking about design patterns. I don't know if you got a chance to read the command chapter in here. I think we'll talk about it next week when Harrison's here. But I wanted to, since that was kind of fresh on my mind and I've been going through this book a lot, just talk a little bit about design patterns and how and when I've found them useful and not useful in game stuff. I feel like I don't know about you, but I've been seeing a lot of stuff on X now or Twitter about how design patterns are terrible and everything should be functional and minimalist, and then lots of back and forth fighting about that kind of stuff. And there are some very valid points there. It's really easy to just like learn a pattern and then start figuring out where you can fit it in your code. I have definitely done that myself before. That's cool. Like, where can I fit that in? Like, let's see how all the spots it'll fit, which is a terrible, terrible thing to do. But overall, I feel that understanding and knowing just a certain set of design patterns is extremely, extremely valuable. And the command pattern being, I think, one of the most useful that's not super obvious. I feel like some of them are really obvious: observer, singletons, events, some of the more simple stuff. But commands are one of those where it's extremely powerful. You can do a lot with it. But a lot of the examples don't really, I think, highlight or show how and why you would use it. So I don't know. What are your thoughts real quick before I dive into it? And I'll tell you what Harrison's examples are too.
So you're talking about the shiny item syndrome, where you see a shiny object and you're like, oh, I like the look of that. I really want to use that. And then, you butcher something to get it in. And there's always going to be a debate with patterns in general about performance. Like, that's what it boils down to. Sometimes they're like, you've abstracted this so far and it's doing so many things that the performance is falling down because you're doing that. And you just have to weigh that stuff up. It's also like, why am I breaking everything into separate components? Because it's easier to actually build, it's easier to do, but is it performant? No, not as much as having it all in one. But do we want it all in one? No, of course we don't. So there's trade-offs in these things that we have to be aware of when we're doing it. And knowing design patterns, even when you look at enterprise and all the rest of it, it's always going to make you a better developer. It's no harm in going, I like the look of that design pattern, but I'm not going to use it in this particular thing because, one, I'm way too far down my game to be able to be redoing a ton of stuff because I really like that shiny service pattern. But it's knowing when to put them in and when not to put them in. And I'm sure Story, who loves this stuff and architecture, is going to have a
Oh
big...
no, what if I stepped into it? Can I leave before something happens?
Oh, it's design patterns. It might as well start as singletons.
Talking about how Visual Basic is the only way to code.
I used Visual Basic for very many years in a professional basis.
That's why I feel very comfortable blasting it because
it is
me.
Unironically the first language I ever learned, legitimately. Not for long.
Mine was regular Basic before there was a visual.
Oh yeah. I used Basic on the Amiga.
On the VIC 20. Yep.
Yeah. For me, it was good old VB.NET was literally technically the first language I learned.
Nice. That was the first one where I actually kind of understood what I was doing. So
VB is the first language I got paid to do. And
VB made me feel like the variables dim. I was dim the whole time I was using it. It wasn't until I got to Java that I started to know what I was doing.
Yeah. I completely agree. Like I remember we were learning VB for some awful reason because of the fact that all the enterprises were then moving over to it, like sitting on top of their databases, etc. And then, just had to do it. I was doing an aircraft. I was working for an aircraft parts company, and they had basically their inventory system, and building all the interfaces on top of that. That was my first professional job, not my first coding, but my first professional job, and that paid for me to go for university. I actually earned more doing that than as a contractor for that company I did my first job when I left university, my first proper job. But it was awful.
All right, so Story. Did you get a chance to read through Harrison's book at all yet?
Not yet, unfortunately.
Okay.
No.
So I'm thinking maybe for next week or the week after that, when Harrison can come on, I really want to go over specifically the command pattern chapter, but then probably a couple of the other ones. Because if you go through that, it's pretty quick. You can get through it, and that's kind of how I feel about the command pattern thing. And I feel we could dive in a little bit more on different ways to set up. Dave, you look like you've got some thoughts.
Yeah. I haven't read it. He hasn't sent me a copy. Terrible. Because I've not been on the show forever. It's all about the examples with design patterns for me, with learning. And if they haven't got good examples of how it's actually used, then I'm not interested in that particular tutorial of it. And I'm sure I've met the guy. I'm sure his examples are good in this. But even like Unity's videos on design patterns, I didn't think the examples were very good. I want them to redo that video because I don't think it kind of felt like learning it for enterprise rather than learning it for video games.
It feels like that often when you go through design pattern ones. And even Harrison's like, it's not bad, but it does cover something that's already implemented in Unity a different way. I mean, it covers a lot of input, which already has its own.
See, you get away with this because, as you rightfully say, Dave, you actively don't do design pattern content, and so you leave it to poor plebs like me to try to explain it in context. And it's like, okay, this is a really good pattern to solve this problem that I first need to write 3/4 of a stat system to get to the problem to show you why it's valuable. And it's like, so it's tough to come up with examples that aren't the simple pizza shop stupid ones. Like a good example is I've got a tree example I was talking about for something recently, and I was doing a routing system that basically was a poor man's version of Angular for a little app, so I could jump to different routing points and stuff. And I was using a property bag object just to pass the data around. And it's like, yeah, these are all patterns I would talk about and describe, but it's like, I'm not going to say step one, let's rebuild Angular, and then we'll move on and explain how that works. Like, of course I'm going to use an example that's the basics. It's very hard to come up with an example that is like at the level of like even the manager stuff. I think I was saying is I built a manager system where I was trying to ensure that I had the stuff in the correct order. Make sure that your logger is instantiated before your later stuff, so the logger doesn't throw errors if you try to do it in the wrong order. And like I said, I was using something called topological sorting, and it's like cool. But now I have to build a graphing tree to explain topological sorting. To explain, it's like it's too far down the rabbit hole. I can't.
Personally, I think that what I like is if you do all of that, but then skip past the explaining of that part and just get into the part that's relevant and kind of hand wave the other part away, assuming that I either know or will figure that part out. Because if it's just at the architectural level of like how these things are tied together, then all of the little specific implementations can just be stubbed out and they can just log stuff or whatever. They don't actually have to do anything.
I only do that though if I've done that in another video so for instance, if I've done a video
in another video,
if I can point to something and say, look at this, because this is how you do it. Like when I'm doing some of the videos on just making things pretty in your inspector and all the rest of it, I will skip past a lot of that to get to the meat of the thing. But I'll say, but if you want to learn how to do that particular item, there's this video that does it. And I think I did that in my last video where I'm like, I'm not going to tell you how to do an editor again. Like, go and look it up. But here's the basic.
Yeah, honestly, I like.
And moving on.
This is going to sound mean, but the problem with that description, Jason, is that doesn't work. And I'll give you a perfect example of why that doesn't work. Is because if you show somebody how something is done in a scenario, they will internalize the steps you did and they will apply it to every problem they see going forward. Because if you use a complicated example, I've done this so many times. Like a good example, like I used the doctor metaphor for this, is if you're trying to teach someone medicine and you say, okay, just sit and watch a doctor for a while, and they watch the doctor put a bandage on somebody because they have a broken leg, they'll walk away proud saying, good, I get it now. And then the next time someone has a cut on their forehead, they'll bandage their leg because they've looked at the steps. They're mirroring exactly what they saw you do, but they don't understand actually why you did it. And that's
what do doctors do in Ireland that they're putting a Band-Aid on your broken leg?
So the point is that this is the kind of thing where you see this all the time in design pattern stuff, where someone will understand a pattern like you'll explain using interfaces so that you can have replaceable objects, and they're like, cool, I will make everything I ever do have an interface on it. It's like, yeah, but now you're not using it because you understand, you're using it because factories are a perfect example. The amount of times I teach someone factory and they're like, oh, anytime I write the word new now, I have to first wrap it in a factory. And it's like, you've now made your code base 10 times harder to work with because you don't understand the problem it was solving. And so of all of the times to say, we'll just skip past the complicated bits and get to the training, design pattern is the worst place to do that. And it's the one that the minute you do that, you end up with people making their code worse. You have to give them something where you give them a problem that they can understand implicitly to explain the actual technology behind it.
There's a YouTuber called GitAmend who's out there, and I recommend everybody subscribe to his channel. He does it quite well, where he talks about, for instance, the factory you were just talking about. If he's got a few things doing new, he's fine. But as soon as he goes past that, he's like, okay, now I'm going to build a factory around this because it's getting to that point. And I like some of the video. I mean, I obviously know the concepts that he's talking about, but I like watching him because I like the way he tells the concepts and uses real game examples, which is always a benefit. So I've been recommending him to a lot of people that come to me and go, can you tell us how to do design patterns? And I'm like, yeah, I'm not the person you want to speak to do that because I'm not a teacher. I'm one of those people that just throws stuff at you and expects you to go and find stuff out for yourself. I'm not going to teach you how to do it. Even if people think I am, I'm not. But yeah.
Hey, well, yeah, I don't know. I still feel like any tutorial is going to be helpful, but I can totally see your issue there where people do that. Because I mean, like I said in the beginning, I think before you're on, like I have certainly been guilty of just trying to plug in patterns where they don't make sense. And I think everybody ends up in that spot at first because it seems exciting and new. But I think the core important part is understanding when and where those patterns are actually just showing up and then following a standardization on that process. Because it's not usually that like you just go like, hey, we need to implement this pattern. It's like, hey, we're starting to see this pattern, and we've got this class that's starting to look very much like a factory or something similar, and maybe we should just standardize this down so when we have 4 or 5 of them, they all look and act the same. Go ahead, sorry.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say, the other problem I have is that some of the best solutions are cobbled together from 5 or 6 ideas that solve this problem. And like, for example, we could talk events, and I could do a video which says, here's how you do events using Unity events, and here's how you do events using C# events, and here's how you might do it with an observer pattern, and here's how you might do it with a mediator, and here's how you might, and I could keep doing all the different variations. But then the problem I'm going to get to is that's not really solving a problem. That's just me saying, here's a fork, here's a knife, here's a whatever. The real problem is if I say, okay, I am building an event system that is designed to take in like 1,000 people spamming a chat board, but I also want to make sure I take in all the messages. And if I want to have an autocomplete, so as they're typing, it has usernames that pop up, but I want to make sure that the username doesn't cause tons of pings to the server. It's like, well, each of those problems has structures and patterns. You could debounce the calls for the username. You could use some sort of topic tree for the individual events. You could then send that to an event bus, which would then use some sort of concurrent tree. Like each one of these is the thing. And the problem I have is that if you teach things as like, this is the event thing for event problem, people will go, okay, I'll apply event thing for event problem. And it's much more valuable to say, what are we doing? Like, we have a stream of input coming in. Like when I say, for example, debounce, that sounds like a fancy, what does he mean by a debouncing thing? I'm saying, now that sounds like we could go, oh, it must be, like, think about it. If I have an input box and I want to have autocomplete as you're typing, if you're typing the letter A and then you're typing the next letter, and I'm going off to an API to some server, downloading information, putting it back, you don't want that happening every time you go, actually, delete, type. And you've seen this on some websites where you start typing and the whole website freezes for a second as you type because the idiots who programmed it didn't understand that actually people don't always type the thing first correctly. So what debounce does is if I send an API request and then I type and I send another API request, it actually says, you know what, hold on a second. It's sending a bunch of them. I'm going to start a timer from the moment they hit it. And basically it's a coroutine that cancels and restarts. And if you stop after half a second, then I'll send the real request. And that that sounds very fancy, but it's literally coroutine start, on press, send or start counter. If counter runs out, send request. That debouncing is it like that solves the concept of staggering loading of asynchronous data to a web server. But nope, you're never going to get to that if you don't understand the problem, because the whole point is that that's one step in a long chain of problems. So I don't like the idea of teaching like, this is pattern or this is thing. I prefer the idea of saying, let's look at the problem, let's try to figure out ways to solve it, and then organically come to the right answer together as we like explore the problem.
How design patterns work. You find the problem and then find the solution and then find what it's called.
That's how they make it in the book, but that's not how you. But the irony is, you're doing it the other way around now. You're literally saying, "Let's take name thing and teach it to everybody," when that's literally the opposite of what we just said.
No, it's let's take name thing and explain the problems that it's there to solve, and then how it solves those problems, or the situations where it solves those problems. I think is generally the way you want to go. Dave, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say something. I was going to, when stories that about this thing that you start typing in and it's just feasing all the time. I was about to say, like this particular example, and he said, because the idiot that coded it, I know the person that coded it. So I'm like, no, I'm not going to call that person an idiot. Sorry.
That was me.
I think you need a bit of both, and you need experience. Like it's gaining experience to know when that design pattern is occurring in your code to be able to do it. And the only way you know that is by learning the design pattern. So you know the design pattern, and then you can feel it coming along as you're building stuff. And that a lot of that comes down to experience and through the years of doing it. And good examples are never going to cover every example that's going to happen in. And you see it with things like service locator pattern and an event pattern. They can crisscross over each other, and suddenly you're using one instead of the other, and it's pulling against each other in what it does. And which one you're picking comes down sometimes to experience and knowing which one to use when it gets to that certain point.
And then there's a difference between what is the pattern versus what is the implementation of the pattern. Even if we say service locator, it's like, oh, like I could say to you, I am going to lazy load the services in my service locator. And even though we could both agree on that sentence, we could be thinking is the service locator an actual singleton? Is it a static instance? Is it coming from some sort of composition root? Is the lazy loading happening using the lazy generic attribute? Is the lazy loading happening because we're instantiating it in a cache when we call? Like, just because I said the sentence doesn't even mean we agree on the like 40 ways we could solve the problem. So yeah, it gets into hairy territory.
So I assume you both saw the question that Dustin asked that popped up down below about whether or not functional programmers use design patterns, because all of the examples you see are very OOP. Personally, I do very, very minimal functional programming. I have in the past very minimally, and it doesn't really interest or excite me too much. So I'm curious, do you guys have an answer to this one? A common set of different design patterns or some overlapping?
You could just say every coding's a design pattern, but that would be a cop-out.
It certainly would.
No, I mean, most of my stuff is OOP. It's been a long time since I've done pure functional programming.
Story, did you have any thoughts on this functional stuff?
Well, okay. So I guess to get a little bit meta on this, the thing is, what's a design pattern? Like Dave was saying, it's like, yes, it is any. The problem I have is the original concept of design pattern came from a book that wasn't programming. It was, I think it was a literal real world architecture. It was like patterns of architecture that was then used as an inspiration for the original Gang of Four book on the concept, which is like actually, and then it basically boils down to how do you define a pattern? Well, a pattern is a named solution to a known problem. And so anytime there is a problem that has come up often enough that people have happened to do the same thing a bunch of times and said, you know what, we should give this a name at this stage, we're doing it often enough, that's a pattern. And so by that definition, pretty much everybody has patterns of everything they do. And there are going to be patterns in functional. But the thing about functional as a strategy, like when you use functional, you're talking about monads. Monads are a pattern. It's a pattern in practice of how you apply a structure in a system. The problem with design patterns is like everything, you start to have the commodification of things, and design patterns as a brand has become the Gang of Four design patterns, and we kind of refer to them as this broad spectrum of the 40 original, but that's not what they are. There's tons of patterns that fall outside the scope of what that book is, and there's tons of patterns in that book which are no longer relevant to anything, that don't really apply based on how software has changed or has become native to the languages. Like again, it like iterator sounded amazing at the time, but now it's just a glorified while loop, or it's the equivalent of using for each or any other solution. And it was amazing to think about observers at the time, but now it's like, well, that's just event. The keyword event is what we call it, and that's very basic these days because we live in a world of asynchronous co-located topic trees that are using event buses of millions. Like we get to the point that that's a comically like generic low-level solution to it doesn't even approximate the concurrency issues you need to have these days to deal with your queues of incoming data at millions of whatever events. So yes and no. The short answer is everyone is using patterns, but when people say pattern, they usually mean the kinds of patterns that teach you the structural patterns. So in the Gang of Four book, there's the four categories. There's books. There's you're talking about creational patterns. What is it? Creational, structural. I forgot the other two definition categories they gave them, but they basically broadly categorize them into areas, and that's kind of what people usually mean when they say design patterns. They say when you're making stuff in code, people tend to have a headache doing that, and so there's a set of patterns which teach you how to like solve that problem. Or if you're trying to get two things to communicate together, there's loads of ways to do that, ranging from having one know the other to many to one to many, and there's a bunch of patterns around that which make your life a lot easier. And then there's various solutions for getting two systems to talk to each other, which are not meant to know about each other. And there's a bunch of strategies around that, like you've got your adapters and your facades and whatever. So when people say pattern, they're usually referring to broad spectrum categories of things that are designed to solve categoric problems, but happen to be very common known structures. And then in each field or industry, there tends to be more specific ones. The book Game Programming Patterns, which is available for free online, everyone should check that one out, talks about the game loop as a pattern. And that may sound comical to you because that's the word update in Unity. It's free, it's just there. But it is a pattern. It's a structural system of how do I have a load of objects that can update in various ways. And similarly to how services are registered and unregistered. Like all of these are patterns. It's just you don't think about them that way because they're these days inherent to a lot of the systems and tooling you're using.
Yeah, that was a very good explanation of Yes, there are definitely patterns there.
TLDR, yes, I guess was the
And I just linked that book too in chat for everybody to check it out. If you haven't seen it, Game Programming Patterns book is great, and there's the free online version you can grab.
And I brought it up to mention that, like, the point I'm mentioning is to say there are patterns in that book which are not the de facto ones people talk about, but they mention ones which are specific to games. But the point is to say that just because you're not in a domain doesn't mean, like, there are patterns there you would not have heard of. There's patterns for woodwork that are how you get joints to collect together. Like, every field has patterns and practices and principles. It's just, are you using a particular strategy or solution? And that's all we're really talking about.
Yeah, let's not get too much into woodworking stuff, because I could just fly off on a topic and start talking about building furniture. Unity have their own one as well, and I've not read it, so I'm not going to recommend it too much, but they have.
I think I did.
Game programming patterns book. And
it was quite short, wasn't it? But yeah, I was going to say, was it a full book? I remember there was one that I read that it was like under like 80 pages. It was quite short.
It's 99 pages.
99 pages, but it's going to have like context
cover.
and stuff, so.
Yeah, so I'll be honest, I skimmed that and it was fine, but they basically covered 3 or 4 basic patterns. Like the other one is more robust, I think. The actual
absolutely
game programming patterns and stuff. Yeah.
I've linked them both in chat. I have to read through. I haven't seen the Unity one. I've read through the game programming patterns one a couple times, so it's pretty interesting. And there was a comment about that too. I want to share, but first, if anybody wants to win a JetBrains writer code, just pick a race and class combo and type it in chat, and then we'll start the battle in a little while, and you'll fight to the death, and the last one alive will get I think I got a 6-month JetBrains writer code. So, or it's actually not just Rider, it's like for any JetBrains product, I think. So you can go get Rider or whatever, but I like Rider, so I actually still pay for my Rider account just so I can tell people I pay for it because I use it that much.
Well, I had to pay for mine. I literally applied for a creator license. They're like, I haven't been creating recently, so it doesn't count. It's like, fine.
Oh man,
they didn't. They just allowed. I had to buy it again. Yeah, so I'm out of spite. I'm gonna have to kick the YouTube channel out again. I'm gonna have to make YouTube videos just so I can get my license now.
It is.
That's the only reason I make YouTube videos, for the free stuff. It's all good.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it for Rider. It's good stuff. So yeah, just choose a race class combo. They're listed up there if you want to win one. Now, what was I going to share next? I already got distracted from the giveaway.
Dev Days of Summer.
Oh, I forgot about that too. Hey, you have a video coming up, don't you?
I do. Yeah, I'm on the Dev Days of Summer this Wednesday.
Nice. We're gonna have to link that down in chat. All right, can you share what's? Oh no, it's secret, huh? The stuff that's coming out Wednesday.
Yeah, it's coming out Wednesday.
Yes.
I can tell you what it is, right?
I don't think so. I don't think you can share the things that are in there. I don't know. Maybe
not the sale items, just the actual topic.
Oh yes, what was the topic?
Can I share the topic? I can share the topic, can't you? You read the NDAs more than I do, or do you? I don't think you do. I
have no idea. No.
Yeah, exactly. So my particular topic is on. I'm trying to remember what it was now. Is on making polished games with Unity Asset Store assets. So the things I do to make the stuff look the way it does when it comes out the other side.
That sounds interesting because you do tend to make stuff look very, very pretty. So I'm sure that'll be useful. Now, I remembered what I was going to pop up, which was the Bulls question about, or not so much a question, but there's a follow-up kind of question down below about it. It says, I think that it's better to know patterns and use them wrong than to never know them and just spaghetti everything. That's a binary between the two, right? Like, which one's better?
Yeah, I don't
sort of use cases as you go. In that binary situation, how do you feel? Do you agree or disagree?
Yeah, I disagree, and I'll say why.
Never learn patterns and just write spaghetti code forever.
Because
you will learn patterns even if you don't, because that's the whole point.
But that's not available in our binary options.
So if we're going to go completely binary options, let's put it this way: if you write spaghetti code and your game is performant, And it works really. You can write a good game, and loads of games that come out have spaghetti code because the person never really knew how it worked. And the game came out and everybody enjoyed it and walked away. If you use design patterns wrong, then you could really unperform at your game. Like, you could really hurt the performance of it.
Stop it from shipping. I mean, but I feel like you could do that either way. You could end up in a situation where
but it's binary. It's one or the other.
Extreme. I know. You're screwed either way.
there is no binary to this. Like, as soon as you start using Unity, you're using a design pattern. It's inbuilt to its nature in the mono behavior.
Yeah, like, not even that. You're using what's called a composite pattern. Like, literally out the gate, you're using a component model architecture. It is a native composite pattern built of already other patterns. So if you write no lines of code, you're already engaged in a pattern system before you start. Like,
which, funnily, I just looked at the contents of their design book, and it doesn't actually have the component pattern. But anyway,
that would be a nice short chapter. Like, add component. Here you go. That's
you should know it. You should know that pattern because you're using it. Like, you might be using it wrong, and lots of people that do Unity are using it wrong. So it's a good thing to know. I don't think there is a binary between knowing them and using them wrong and spaghettiing everything. I've built games that were spaghetti everything when I was young and put them out. People played them, they liked them, and they didn't know everything was spaghetti. And then as I moved on, I used design patterns a lot more. I might be using them wrong.
So here's my problem with this is I used to tutor in college. I used to tutor when I was in college, the people the year above me, and then when I left, I used to tutor used to work 2 buildings across from the college, and then I would tutor the next years after that. And I noticed there was a lot of common trends, and it got to the point I would ask someone their opinion of certain patterns, and I would know where they are in their. I could say you're X numbers of years in, and you're currently reading this book, and I could tell exclusively from their current opinion of certain patterns. And this is why I have a strong opinion on this particular topic, because it's not about whether you should or shouldn't learn them. It's that if you learn them at the wrong time in your life, you are going to get the wrong impression. If you do what I did, like an idiot, and sat down and read the whole book when, like, your first year of learning programming, you're going to start by going, okay, programming's great, I can write whatever I want, stuff happens. Then you'll hit your first time you've got 2 classes and go, wait a minute, how do I get class A to talk to class B? And you might sit there and have an existential crisis about who really owns who. What is that? Like, and you'll go into a whole big thing of like, I don't know how this works, in an Ouroboros of confusion. And you'll find out, oh, there's names for solutions for these. There's patterns. Cool. I'll read the whole book, page to page, figure it all out. And then you'll get these really complicated, like, multi-tiered answers to problems that you don't have yet. And you'll start trying to justify finding ways to use all of the new tools in your toolbox to solve problems you don't have. And after about a short while of doing that, you will start to hate your own code. You will look at your code and sigh with exhaustion at the mess of confusion and have to remember why you did it this way and where you put stuff, and you will be soured on both writing code and the patterns you use to use it. So the short answer is that don't do that. Don't do it that way, because I've seen too many people do that. The solution I say now is earn the solution. So what I mean is, do the dumbest, simplest thing you can think of until you hit a wall. And when you hit a wall and go, oh, this sucks, this is confusing, I don't know how to do this next bit. You then Google it or ChatGPT it or whatever and find out, how does this work? How do you do this? And you'll often see a word come up, often a name of a pattern. You now have been given the name to the definition of a solution to the problem you currently are facing, at which point you can research that pattern and go, oh, I see now, given the problem I have, given my understanding of why the problem is a problem, why that solution might be beneficial. And that still doesn't mean you should apply that solution, but it's given you one avenue of which to think about that problem and a way you could possibly solve it. And then you do that a few more times. You might learn other adjacent patterns, because again, there's a lot of crosstalk, and you'll be like, okay, people other than me have solved this problem in these 4 different ways, but in their case, they were doing this. In this case, they were doing that. Mine isn't quite like that. What elements match closest to my problem? And you pick the best solution for the problem. So in short, patterns are great, but patterns are often, again, their origin was people did stuff, not communicating, then they'd go to meetups and talk to other devs and go, oh, we had a similar problem where we had a concurrent blocking issue where we had to deal with passing information left and right. How did you solve your one? Oh, cool, we did very similar. We should give that a name so that next time we communicate, we have a name for the thing that we agree is a good solution to that problem. Patterns were named after stuff that was seen. They weren't sat and composed in sort of raw, empty terms, right? So basically that is you want to earn problems, find solutions, resolve, and use them. And so patterns just become a way to communicate with other devs. But learning them as like this wholesale set of stickers you can apply to problems is going to give you even more problems.
Potentially.
Yes. Yeah. First, Yori, the chief of spaghetti, has to agree that spaghetti is fine. That was the best comment. I think it's funny because I generally agree with the application, the planning, and the actual learning. I think the only part we might disagree with and I'm not even sure we do, you can let me know, was on whether or not you should get some cursory knowledge of what those patterns are, or if you think it's too risky. And
you read everything. Like, again, I read a million books on this. Like, read all the stuff you can and follow people's stuff and read code. But what I'm saying is, just because you can see the lines of code written, don't assume you know why they were chosen. And if you don't try to use what you see wholesale, that's the bit I'm trying to say, is that because what happens is...
I agree 100%. Sorry. Yeah. I thought you were saying maybe like, don't read those because you might just be tempted to...
I guess if I was to distill it down to a buzzword, I would say do not use a pattern unless you know why it was used. I think that's a much clearer way of explaining what I was saying, is that if you see a pattern, don't apply it because it feels like it roughly fits into a similar style of problem.
Or you might need it in the future.
Yeah, if you can't tell me what problem it was solving. So, for example, factory pattern. If you were not swapping between two similar families of products or elements, do not use a factory. That's the point of, if you're not constructing elements that could potentially need to change the parent container, don't use a factory. If you don't need either the ability to rebind or undo, don't use commands. Understand the problem that they're there for, use the solution that they're there to solve. So if you can't describe to me why this is used, don't use it. Don't put interfaces in everything just because interfaces are on other people's code. And so that's what I mean.
Put interfaces on everything.
Sure.
You only ever want to access the interface externally. Never call a direct class. You need to make sure you have at least one interface for every class.
I will say on the interface.
I've definitely seen some of those.
I've definitely seen people do that.
Here's a very good interface is a perfect example of this. Here's why I'm very cautious on this, right? Interfaces are super powerful. They're one of the things that they 10x my ability to program when I understood the difference between the two. The problem is, if you live in interface land, you're like, oh, interfaces are contracts. Contracts are superior to concrete implementations because you can have more contracts, you can have multiple interfaces on stuff, all this great stuff. But then you end up doing what's called downcasting, where you start making everything in your entire project an I interface something, and you end up getting to the point where you're writing code and going, oh, I've passed in an I view for my UI, but the view doesn't have the portion which tells me that it's actually image, and now I have to upcast it back into a type of screen view so I can then find the text 2D so I can do this stuff. And people start writing stupid code to get around the problems they invented for themselves because they
just need to inherit some more interfaces.
Yeah, you just need to put another interface on the end of it that does that thing.
Yeah, exactly. Just one that inherits the other two. Jeez, sorry.
And if you really want to get even further in, you can in Unity put interfaces into fields, and then you don't have to bring in the components, and then it's so much fun.
And then don't forget, you can also implement the iSerialization handler from Unity, so you can make sure your interfaces even serialize on the inspector, just so they add extra confusion, because it would be really nice if you could. So the point being is that because a pattern is there to solve a problem, if you use it incorrectly, you will put yourself in a position where you've now lost information that you may need for whatever the next step is, because you don't know how to get access to it from the direction you've given for yourself, or you've managed to make requirements that I always say this about commands as well. point of a command pattern is that you're able to execute code irrespective of what the code holds and place it in different locations. Perfect example being a lot of what Dave stuff does with using the commands in Unity to bind to editor elements or to do the various stuff with the validator functions. And if you don't understand that, you'll do what I always say is people do command patterns with a parameter requirement in the pattern, where you say execute object whatever, and that seems fine at first, but what you realize, you've now got a dependency chain where the object execution requires an object to run, which kind of defeats the core contract of this is a command that can run anywhere, because it can't run anywhere because you now have dependency before you can run it, and it starts to break the actual cycle of the pattern. And so again, a lot of these patterns, they have reasons they exist and structures behind them, and so just as long as you understand it, you can.
Are you saying I did it right or wrong?
Yours was good. It's fine.
Oh, good. Okay, just checking.
Like what I'm saying is, like, you've been in that situation where there's some service or library or something you want to access, and you say, "Oh, I'll just call the function .do thing," and it's got a requirement. Oh, in order to call do thing, you have to pass in a I something something something. You're like, where the hell do I get an I something something for this thing so I can call the function I want to call? You know,
shift F12, right?
You have to go hunt down some other servers, and that's because there's a dependency expectation here, which is leaking the internal dependencies, when that shouldn't be your concern here at all. You should be able to just say do. It's the whole command query separation thing, which is like separate. The point being that you can, the fact that Dave does a load of stuff which integrates non-Unity stuff into Unity editors is the point. It's a design pattern that freely supports, providing this thing returns true to validate its use, providing this thing executes a function, it can be bound to key press, menu item, whatever. It is agnostic to its usage of source. But a lot of people create command patterns where you are forced to use them using a manager, where you have to like pass in command managers to even use the command. It's like, well, now you've defeated the point of the, yeah, that's what I meant.
I've been meaning to expand it. I've been meaning to make a video on that validation stuff and just do the whole thing, like show the whole validation system in one single hit. But I haven't got around to making that 40-minute video or 1 hour video of how it all fits in together. Validation is one of the most important things in building video games, and I really wish people did it more. But back to the design pattern. The other thing is TTC, time to code. Like if you've got one instance and you're building a massive design pattern and system around it to deal with that one single thing that actually isn't that less performant or isn't that much of a problem, don't do it. Like, I'm going to get roasted for saying that, but just don't bother. Like, just have a bit of spaghetti code there to do that bit, rather than spend another month building something and testing something for something that already works, because you're never going to have another instance of it happening in your code. But once that second instance turns up, yeah, start thinking about it. But obviously, there's performance trade-offs and all the rest, I should caveat, but yeah. I am one of those people that will literally just go, right, it's fine. Just leave it as it is and just run with it.
Yeah, like people often think that because of the way I speak that I don't do those like little compromises. Literally, I wrote code earlier today where I had this whole, it's a dictionary of key value pairs to activate stuff thing. And there's one difference edge case. It's if this thing happens to be the config manager, you don't do it this way. It does one little thing differently. Now, I could try and extract a behavior in a handler and manage some sort of, or I can just say, if it's config, do this. That's fine for now. It's like a glaringly different one line of code that breaks this really nice, neat, automated structure, but I don't care. Because right now, it fixes what I need. It's not messy. It's not bad for performance. It just does a couple of things, and I don't mind putting in this like single case hack. But if three or four more things come up, I will extract it out, make a handler, and do whatever. So yeah, those kinds of things are perfectly fine, providing you know at the point they start to become a problem.
You heard it here. Jason settles. Yeah,
I do.
Yeah.
Like I'm here on this call, for example.
Oh, hush burn. I haven't been on in ages. I feel bad. But I'm here now.
So speaking of that time to code, I'm curious. One of the things I was working on was a little video on some of the tools that I use to speed stuff up. And I know I've talked to you guys multiple times about how I like to use hot reload, and I'm working on some good examples for you, Story. I've actually been like this week using it multiple times, and I'm like, yeah, this is a perfect example of like where it's do where there are alternate ways that I could do it, but this is 5 to 10 times faster. So I'm going to be putting something together for that. I wanted to show you, but I was curious. I've got a couple things picked out that I wanted to highlight, but are there any like tools or things that you guys use that just makes your development drastically faster that you kind of like use as a default most of the time?
Yeah, so I write a game debugger for every single game I make. It's one of the things I write on every single one, because I am not going to sit there and play through my entire level to get to that one point where I need to test something. I am not going to play that entire level to run that interaction. I'm not going to.
Can you explain what this thing is? I've seen them, but for everybody who hasn't seen it,
I call it the game debugger, and you can call it other things. So I'm getting into I'm going to tell you mode. So basically, for instance, I'm making an isometric twin stick shooter, blah, 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 story-driven game. I start at the top of a subway, and then I work my way down onto the platform of that subway to then go and speak to an NPC. Now, I have a dialogue running in that NPC, and that triggers animations and all the rest of that stuff. Great. But if I was to test that, if I was to say, change the dialogue, to change something else, to change the animation that runs or anything like that, I am not going to walk all the way down my level, kill all the enemies to get to that person to talk to them every time. So I add a teleport node. So now I have teleport nodes throughout my level, and I could just drop on a thing that says, this is a teleport location. And my character will teleport to that location if I press it in the game debugger. If I have an interaction that launches a cutscene, this cutscene has a subway train come into a station, and it looks all fancy and it's got nice post-processing and all the rest of it. But when I want to test that in game, I'm not going to want to run to that location every time. So the game debugger, what it does is it searches the level and says, okay, these are all the interactions. These are all the trigger zones. Here are all the dialogues. Here are all the teleport points. And it's just a little interface that sits there that I can drop down and go, all right, show me the teleport points. I want to go to that location. Show me the interactions. I want to press on that interaction. And it's such a simple thing to create that it literally, as the level starts up and you're about to use it, it just runs through and says, here's all the things I want to know about in your level, all the interaction, all the trigger volumes, all the rest of it, and just runs them. And that is what I run on this particular game debugger. But we can go back to the point I made 10 years ago. I made a game called Robo and Bobo about a robot that wanted to find his teddy bear. There were 100 levels of puzzles that you had to go through. Whenever I made a change, were we going to play that 100 levels? Let's say I changed.
I hope so. Slackers.
We did, but we didn't do it every single time. And this is the point. I made something that literally would run through the entire game and give me feedback saying, this level never finished. This level finished, took this amount of time. This level did this. This level did this. And it would give me loads of analytical feedback to it. And it was my game debugger for that. And if I was started up the game, I'd go, I want to go to this level. I had a little editor window that I could just press. I want to go to that level. And that level would start, and I would do that level. And I could work it all the way through from the beginning. So the tool I write for every single game I use is a game debugger, because my time is valuable and I'm not going to spend it playing through my levels constantly. Not to say I don't play all my levels.
This game is too boring. I don't want to play it anymore.
Everybody gets to that stage in their game at some point where they're like, I really can't listen to this audio all the time. So they turn the audio off. And then
that's like in the first week.
Yeah. The funny thing is, every developer does this. They turn off the audio and then they forget about the audio, and then they go back to it and go,
even I love audio.
Rubbish?
I talk about it all the time, and even I'm like, I just can't hear this loop again. I just need it off while I work.
Yeah. So game debuggers are just something that you can add to, and I'll do a video on them when I start doing my devlog series coming up. That just tells you, this is what I do for a game debugger, and this is how useful it is to just be able to start the game up and press interaction, and suddenly that cutscene runs. It's so valuable. It will save you so much time. And I make that game debugger early on. Like, it's one of the tools I write really early on in the development, and I keep adding to it as I go along. keep iterating to it. And I have a nice layout that means I can just put actions in there. I can just write a script that just gets loaded into it, that sources the next thing and has the thing that runs when you press on it. So I'll have something that says, right, okay, find all these and then run this action when you find them. And that's just a class that just sits on something else that gets pulled in by the game debugger. And I just write that one class when I add something new. So to say,
that's also something too that you should probably point out is that a lot of people look at tooling and they go, oh, you're putting a lot of work into this stuff. But what a lot of people don't realize is when we're giving you a demo of a tooling thing, we're going to sit there and do this dramatic, here's the thing, we'll put a stuff. In reality, we're working on a problem. We hit a wall or idea and go, oh, actually, I might need to do this again. We'll like tab to another thing, write 4 lines and go back to what we're doing. And a new line item has been added to a drop-down or menu item. Like we're not sitting there pontificating about tooling. The point is that as you work, you're like, oh, that's annoying, or I don't want to do that again, or actually I might have to do this with all of these when I change the title of this, and you write a quick thing that does it, and that's it, and you move on. And then over time, you'll just have a lot of these. Like one of the common ones I do a lot is if I have a thing which takes a scriptable object, and there's multiple of those scriptable objects, it's so simple in onValidate to say, if the project only has one of those scriptable objects, and this field is blank, just put it in there. Like I just do that once. And it's like the amount of times you have a project where there's only one of that particular entity in the whole project, just presumptively put it there. And if there's more than one, draw 2 and say, pick one, please. Like it's not, these are just little things that once you've done them once or twice, it becomes 1 or 2 lines and the stuff just gets better over time.
Yeah, and that's the validator is a big one that goes in really early on. And I'm lucky in the sense that I have a library for validation that I just pull in to all my projects, and it starts up, and then I just have attributes that I stick on those things. But it was well worth spending that time to build it as a library, to have that required attribute, to have that validatable interface that just sits on my objects that literally I could just say run, and it just gives me a validation. And for every game, I'll write a set of validation rules as I go along that sit in the project itself outside of the library. But it was well worth having that really early on in my game development to be able to move forwards better and quicker and know when I'm missing something. How many times do you start up a project and you're like, oh, why am I getting a null reference? Oh, why am I getting this? When if you spend the time before you build these projects to write a validator that has that required or whatever, that you could, before you press play, you've added something to you've added a new serialized field of a component, and then it just sits there, goes, shows up as red and goes, you haven't added something to this. Your game is not going to run before you run it. Like that saves, you can think that saves a minute amount of time, but over the lifetime of building your project, that is hours.
Especially when you're like, again, the amount of times you catch yourself at 2 a.m. and you get a client request of like, can you swap out this video or this asset? And you're going through replacing a bunch of stuff, and you're just waiting for that bloody spinner to thing, and you press play, and then you wait for the whole thing to compile and build domain, and then it's like, oh, you forgot this field. And you're just that, like, not only is it time, it's just so soul destroying when you're like, I want to go to bed. I just need to fix this one thing. And if I didn't have to wait for this entire cycle, it's like when a build fails after the very like end step of you're like, I hate this so much. So yeah, those moments can be really life-saving when you're just on the end of your rope.
You remove a component from your code because you don't use it anymore, but that thing happens to appear in a lot of levels, but you don't need those in that level anymore. You can remove them, but now you have to go through all your levels and find it and remove it. What do you do? Well, you open the level and then you press play and you play that level until the null reference pops up. No, what are you doing? Like, you're going to miss them and you're going to spend all that time doing it. I have a button. I load up my level. I press a button and it validates the whole thing and goes, yeah, these are all missing. This thing's missing. So whenever I remove a component, I can just so quickly run through my game and just replace all that areas that it appears in and just know how that works. So yeah, validation. So I think the question was, what tools do I have in all my projects?
Yeah, so it sounds like you kind of build your own.
Yeah, I do. A lot of that comes down to the fact that I've been building Unity games for like 10 plus years, and I've built libraries over that time. And I use those libraries in all my projects. So I don't need to go and buy something from the store. I have those things, and I had them before they were in the store. You know, I had stuff that was doing custom inspectors before Odin existed. Right. If I didn't have that anymore, I'd go and get Odin.
And also, like, to be brutally honest too, like, again, for tool developers like us, the thing is, about 50% or more of the tool development code when you buy an asset is the quality of life tooling on top of the code. brutally speaking, like things like spline tools or waypoint managers or whatever, this minimalist version, you could probably do that in 6 lines of code. A usable, practical product version might be 100 lines of code, but an asset might be 1,000 lines of code, because it's not about just 100 lines of code. It's about, look, you don't have to understand Bezier curves to press the smooth button on your waypoint system to get it to smooth. Like, the whole point is someone has gone and like done the legwork for you. And if you have been doing it as long as we have and hit all of these ourselves at some point, you have written your own pooling systems, you have written your own spline systems, you have done this stuff. So when it comes to looking at an asset, you're at a point where you're like, do I need this person's suite of editor tools and features and stuff? Like, as much as I love Doozy UI, sometimes I look at it and I go, I don't need all that. Or if I'm even using DoTween, if I'm using DoTween for my project, I'd be like, DoTween is awesome, but the problem with DoTween is it's just an easing curve. If I don't need the full DoTween, I can just write the 4 lines of code that are a interpolation. I don't need the library. And when you've been doing it long enough, there's more and more of those. You find yourself finding more things where you're like, I could just write 5 lines of code with a cache. I don't need to get Pool Manager 17 or whatever. That's not to say I don't use any assets, but it has to be something which like is vastly outperforms either what I would do, or like a good example is
what qualifies there. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say everything Powell does, simply because I'm looking at it like, I'm not going to sit and write a really performant streamed asset system for my game, because that's insane.
How about a river system?
Yeah, like this is the kind of stuff, like that's where I would be like, that objectively is more like, unless I've decided to dedicate 3 months to do a thing, I'm going to use an asset that'll solve it. But if you're talking about things that are like normal utility, and even utilities, right? There's a lot of really great assets. Like the again, there's assets which will be like, we'll auto save the editor every X amount of time, and it's like, yeah, but I can write that in 3 lines of code. Like, these things they're good assets. I'm not saying they're bad as assets, but if you're sitting there yourself and you've done it enough, you can just be like, I can just write the thing I need, you know. And like I have my own interpolation library. I don't actually technically, I still use PrimeTween, but only in cases where it's like, well, they've put more effort into performance than I have. And so I could go and like really make mine more performant if I want to, but it's like, I don't want to dedicate that time. If I really decide I don't want a dependency for some reason, I will. But as long as the other thing outperforms my thing in any capacity, either in time or effort or resources, I will use that thing instead.
Yeah. So, and on that, if I was going to talk about the ones that I bring into projects, UMotion Pro is one that I bring into a lot of my projects, because a lot of the projects I do have realistic characters that need to have animations, and I want to tweak those animations, and I want to do things to that. I don't want to pull that out into a separate thing. I can just use UMotion Pro to do that thing. I got the, for instance, setting up where the hands are going to be stuck. I'm not going to do that in an external editor, because I have to pull that character out. I have to pull the scene out. I have to set up where the scene is. I have to put the character where the scene is. I have to do the animation with the character with his hands there, and then work it all out. And all in UMotion Pro, I can just go, okay, that is locked in that position. That is locked in that position. And I'll keyframe through here, and I'm job done. And I've done it in the editor, and it exports out to a separate FBX if I want, or it exports out to a single animation. But the asset's still there. So I'm not killing myself. I'm not shooting myself in the foot by just tweaking that duplicate animation that then things change that come back, because I have the asset that I'm actually editing in the project. So UMotion Pro is one I build in. I used to bring in Pro Builder to a lot of those things as well.
I still bring in Pro Builder.
Still bring in the old Pro Builder?
The old Pro Builder, yeah. Cinemachine's another one. I'm not going to write my own camera, like the entire system, because that one has too many features for the stuff.
Oh, yeah.
I talked before about, I really still love Kinematic Character Controller. And I love it because it's exactly the middle ground of what we're talking about. It is a solver for physics collisions with a character controller. It is nothing else. It is just that. In fact, it'll annoy people if you install it and go, this sucks. It's not a good character. It isn't. You're right. It's not a full character controller. It is a physics system with which to build your character controller on top of. And I love that. I love the fact that you don't get those weird fly off in the space moments that some character controllers have. And that's what I want from an asset. Someone who's like really looked at and solved one problem that I don't have the mental capacity to solve, and I can build on top of their benefits of what they've done.
Unless I really want to build it. Because I've been a tools programmer for such a long period of time that I'm like, oh, that'd be so fun to make that. And if I have the time.
Saving is one of those. I'm like, there's so many assets I could use that are perfectly fine, like easy save or all those others. I'm like, no, I'm doing my own. It's just too fun not to. There's too much, like, I want to do my bit packing. I want to make sure I support like all the encryption stuff. I just love that one. Yeah.
You really hate yourself, don't you? Talking about, I have a scene backup tool that I built a while back, and there's loads of them out there, but I'll just use mine. They're more feature set, but I don't really need that many features in it. It just if it takes every minute or so, it saves it as a backup, and then if the engine crashes, Unity editor crashes, and you reopen it, it says, "Oh, you've got a backup here. We think the editor might have crashed. Do you want to go back?" And you just press yes, I do, and it does all the things for you. So I've got that myself, but there are ones that are better out there, but I don't need more functionality to it, so I just left with that.
I wonder if anybody in chat has any that they would recommend. Mine, real quick, just as a quick, just to give the list. Obviously, Hot Reload. I've talked about it a dozen times. That VTabs, I just can't stop using it. I feel like any project where I have like any reasonable amount of actual folders and assets, it's just so fucking handy just having it there and being able to go around and see the different categories and groups of things that I have, and to just take regular old objects and drag them to make them a tab instead of having to right click and hit properties. I know it's like, a tiny time saver, but that one makes it so I actually do it all the time. Have you done that, Dave? Have you used VTabs yet?
No, I have my own that's really ropey that I've thought about updating and then doing a video on.
You should try this VTabs one. They'll probably give you a free code. It's probably better than the one you have, and it does like 5 things all in once, and it's tiny, super fast, and lightweight.
Yeah, I'm sure it does. I done actually I didn't put the video out, did I? Because I hated the way I'd scripted it. But I done selection history. I done a video on selection history and going back over selections and going forward through selections.
I will say, actually, on that note, there is one asset that I recommend for that reason. It's the only one in a while where it caught me off guard for that kind of thing. There's one called Ultimate Editor Enhancer. And I checked, and apparently I bought it years ago. Like, literally, I've had it for years and never used it. And at some point, I was like going through my assets and I installed it, and I'm like, oh, this is actually really, really good. And I decided I'm probably going to add it to most projects. And the reason why is it's one of those ones that just stays out of your way. It's like once it's in your project, it's just there. And I just kept finding little buttons the person had added because it just feels like someone had gone in, and one of them was things like histories and stuff like that. So.
Yeah, I done a whole script and video on it, and then I was just like, oh my, like I found myself going spaghetti. And then you're going to use this to go back. And if you go back, you can go forwards. And when you go forwards, you can clear this out to go back. And then I was just like, oh, I hate this script. I just found myself hating it. So I never made the video. It's still sitting there pretty much.
I have about 6 videos like that. And there was like one recently enough where I was following along, and I was like, I realized in retrospect I had done really slowly through the easy part and then sped through the hard part, and I was watching it going, the entire like structure of this video is wrong. Yeah.
That was my problem. I'd literally had the whole script where I talked about how, and then right at the end I've got and put diagram on screen of it going back and going forwards and all the rest of the selection history, and I was like, that should be right at the beginning because that explains it so well. But it doesn't fit in the script. And I had another video I wanted to make, which was the last one, which somebody had requested. So I just went and done that one instead. But, yeah. And this Dev Days of Summer video that took way longer than I want to admit to make. I'm watching all the other ones and I'm like, that person literally went through a list of their favorite assets and talked about them and all the rest. Yeah, I didn't do that. I really should have just done that.
Yeah, you made an entire game and started a company and I built a display at the Coliseum.
Actually, a little bit, yeah.
Mr. B style.
I took my game that I've been working on and went, I'll add things into this game so that I can show these things happening and what I plan on doing 5 months down the line. And I started putting it in there. Oh, my goodness. But, yeah.
Your audio just went to shit, Dave.
Oh, sorry. Am I okay?
Yeah, you're back.
Good. Okay.
It sounded like you were just losing your voice and getting quieter.
I might actually be losing my voice. I do. I can't shout. It's physically impossible. So yeah, I go into why I do light baking and certain things I put into light baking and go through this whole thing. And then I suddenly realized in the script, oh yeah, I've got to talk about an asset that I use with it. So put it on the end. But yeah, it's fun.
I just linked that V-tabs too in chat. I highly recommend that one. I want to really quickly, before Andrew is allowed to say anything at all, mention my last one, which is not one that I recommend for everybody, but for everybody doing mobile stuff, that Proxima Inspector is fucking amazing, and it's free. You can get it for free, you can try it out for free, and I mean, it does everything except for the editing side, and even then it's not that expensive, but it lets you basically run on device. So you run your game on your phone or whatever, and then you can view through a web interface the inspector, and then it's kind of like a replica of the inspector. See the things in the hierarchy that are loaded, all the scenes, the objects, the properties, and then with the pro version, you can go in and modify those things and execute stuff. So it's super handy for debugging mobile stuff, which I've had to do a lot lately. Like I mentioned, working on this mobile game, and there's a lot of mobile stuff to do, a lot of randomly like, hey, this works fine in the editor, works fine on PC or web, but breaks on mobile, and this just makes it super easy. It's almost zero work to set up. It's kind of like the other two, and that's kind of the theme with all of them. V-tabs, you drop it in, just magically works. The hot reload is pretty much the same way. You drop it in and hit the button, and it just starts working, and you write code and it automatically reloads. And then this one, you just drop it in, instantiate the prefab, and you magically have a connection. So Andrew,
what the skibidi is going on?
Yeah, we were talking about first we were talking about design patterns, but now we've kind of moved on to tools, specifically ones that we use kind of regularly to improve and enhance development and kind of speed things up. Dave has a whole bunch of custom ones that he writes. He was talking about, Story mentioned a few, but tried to minimize them, except for that it's ultimate editor enhancer, right? I remember you mentioned that before. I keep forgetting to actually just go in and do like a full deep dive on it.
Yeah. Like I said, I you know me, I don't normally recommend loads of assets and stuff. Like even things that I know I like Console Pro, which is a good asset. I just find I try to avoid extra stuff unless I really need it. That one is one that just caught me off guard. So I just noticed like it would just add buttons in a few places that would do like it would add the like little script template icon beside the scripts in the project view, and I'm like, I click that and it would automatically right in that folder where my mouse is, it would create a new script and stuff. And it's like, oh, these are just, again, none of these are life-changing things, but there's just so many of these. It has the built-in auto save seen on certain timers. It would automatically keep a history of X number of previous selections. It had extra keyboard shortcuts for like jumping to particular windows. If you wanted to go straight to like one button would bring you straight to full screen game. Like all of these things that I'm like, I wouldn't have even thought of asking for this, but there's just like so many little things. And what really sold me is it's one of the few times I used an asset like that. And I went, oh, this person uses this. So many of these are so obtuse and hard to market that they're not put in there to pad out a collection of features. Each one of these feels like someone was frustrated and made it. And I really resonated with the fact that it just felt like this was a tool made to get work done, and I just don't feel that way about a lot of assets, and so I kind of respected the work on it.
And that sounds good, because I have a customized tool for every single one of the things you just said because I use them.
Yeah,
they're like the main things to do.
Mm-hmm.
I want a back button. That's it.
What, for selection?
Yeah, because so often I'll be doing something in the inspector, and then I click off.
Press the F key. That's your tip on that. If you're working in the hierarchy view and you select an object and you click something and it moves away, you can press F to select the object that's selected in the thing to bring it back.
No, but it's
no. He's talking about going back through the selection. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You can make one, or there's like multiple assets that do that and stuff.
My whole video wired them to the 2 side mouse buttons, like you do with every web browser, so you go backwards and forwards. It's all wired into that. I am so good. Oh,
I have the same. I literally have the same thing.
You literally make me sick, Andrew. You literally make me sick. Yeah, so I'm not making it now. And anybody that wanted it, it's Andrew's fault.
Yeah.
I also use this. I've mentioned it before. I love this thing. This is it's called Tourbox. This is Tourbox Elite Pro or whatever the stupid thing is. But basically, it's just a collection of button styles and sliders and whatever, and they're all bindable. And it uses the the window context, so it knows which app you've got running. And so basically it's a full set of keyboard shortcuts per app. And so I have a whole bunch of things. Like when Discord's open and I slide that, it goes between channels. And when I rotate the other thing, it goes between people. And when I do that, it like moves between different tiers of the, and it's all bound to like shift plus page up, or whatever the equivalent thing is. But it means that I have one thing where this button will always pause the video, regardless of whether I'm in VLC or on YouTube or whatever, or this button will always change the volume regardless. So it's just really nice. And I do the same thing with that. I have a bunch of like little helpers that I know if I want to back, I have a back here that's always back regardless of whatever app I happen to be in. You know?
It's funny. I just have my mouse button for back. Like it's bound to back based on every different thing. And I was looking.
Unity didn't implement a back selection. It's just nonsense. I'm just really irritated.
The one that still kills me more, if there's one thing that blows my mind out of sheer why didn't they do it, is still when I buy assets, I have bought them once. I have a collection of assets, and yet every time I click the package manager, it re-downloads the entire collection of my assets. It's like, just save one file on my computer one time, and every time I ever open any Unity editor, anytime in the package manager, you will never have to re-download that.
But when you switch accounts, it has to re-download that whole list.
Then download it again, hash it to a name, and now you never have to do that again either. It's so simple to do this.
Audio. Previewing audio was one for me. That's why I built that editor thing.
Yeah, the click one. I remember that. You had to double click on the on the
now you just double click an item in the an audio in the hierarchy and it plays. Like, why is that not a thing? So I literally, I put that free on the asset store.
I actually have two that I do. That's funny. This is good. You talk about these. One that I put into every one of my projects as well is the keyboard shortcut Alt-E. Will open wherever my mouse currently is selected in the hierarchy in my Explorer. So if I'm copying and dragging objects in, because a little tip, if you're doing stuff later on with art and you want to replace it, dragging in a new one gets messy to replace stuff. You can't just literally replace the file. The meta stays the same and it'll hot swap in location. And so if you're getting like PSDs from an artist or something, it's a pain to go right click, open an Explorer, go to I just go Alt-E, drag, close, simple. So I have my Alt-E for everything. It's just like a default little utility script.
Yeah, shift double click on a folder, opens the folder in File Explorer. Like I built that as well because it's just like, why is that not a thing?
I have another one as well that goes to the app data directory because it drives me insane that there's no click button to say, if you save data into the default data save directory, there's no like press button to go there. It's like, you have told me this is the on-device place to store it, and there's no button to go to the one place everyone is storing it. Yeah, so
I have that.
Yeah.
Yep, I have that one because that is super irritating to go and find.
My favorite, I've recently been building some helpful tools for my own stuff, and one of my favorite ones that I've built recently is the component menu that lets you click on a component and there's options to move to a new child object, move to a new object.
She wants to say hello to the internet real quick.
Hello, internet.
You gonna tell them hello?
Hello. Hello. Hi.
Make sure Jason pays you for your screen time.
It's true.
I want her down.
She wants down. She's bored of this.
Yep. It doesn't take long.
As soon as the English guy spoke, she went
child labor. So
I've got these scripts that move components basically. Because I got tired of copying it, pasting it, removing it, and I was like, "This is bull." So
I have another one common do as well is the amount of times I have a parent object, which is a bunch of child objects, and I want to like look at the child objects, but I don't have to open, expand, and go through. I have a little editor thing that will always show all children on the parent like thing as a list, so I can basically like jump down and sort through them on the root. Basically, my game manager has services. I don't want to have to go in and like expand services and find the object. I click game manager and there's like a summary where every service has a status and a name, and it just basically lists them all going name, status, button to go to, name, status, button to go to. And I have this like snapshot parent that shows me all the stuff.
That's nice.
Yeah, I recently updated my copy all components from one game object to another. So it could literally just press on two game objects and say copy it over, and it'll just copy all the components on there and move them over, which is actually a little bit more complicated than you think. You don't just go through because some have requirements on others, and if you don't put them in the right order, they screw up. So I have a topological thing that goes in, sorts it all out, and then puts them into the actual thing, and then reorders them into the thing so that they're the right order on the game object as well.
Nice. I've got a component remover script. You select a bunch of objects. It just shows you all the components on all of them, and you can click a button to remove them from all of them and their children. So if you've got pesky colliders and you're like, I don't want any colliders on any of these, just select them all. Click
or if you're integrating with an asset pack, I imagine, and want to get rid of all their rubbish scripts.
Or if you want to integrate an asset package and want to get rid of all their rubbish scripts and quickly migrate their particles to a much better system, then yes, these little helpful things will save you a lot of time.
Pull in the package, but don't pull in the scripts that come with it, and then have a tool that gets rid of all missing scripts.
That's harder, actually. I now have the tool to get rid of missing scripts, but that was a much different problem to solve than just removing components because of the way Unity works. Turns out. I didn't like it.
I have a couple of videos on removing. There's like my best videos on how to remove missing scripts.
I don't trust people on YouTube.
Scripts. I don't either, and I wouldn't trust me.
At one stage there was something, I forgot what it was, but there was something that he posted. He was like, look at this thing I found, and I just linked my video that was talking about that. It's like, I guess you didn't watch my videos, did you? It's like, Andrew doesn't watch our videos.
Oh, Andrew doesn't watch your videos. I was just about to say, what are you trying to say?
But I also don't always remember the videos that I watch, you know?
Yeah. At one stage, he posted the Fisher Yates Shuffle. I found this thing. It's pretty great. And I said, literally, a year ago, I made a PDF and sent it to you just for you about Fisher Yates with code examples. He's like, oh, I forgot. It's like,
the best one is
in my head, I thought I got it from you right now. So maybe I've now gone the other direction.
Yeah.
The best one is when somebody sends something back to you that you wrote. And they're like, oh, you should use this tool. And they send it back. You're like, yeah, I wrote that.
Yeah.
Super annoying.
So they're right. You should be using it then. They're 100% correct.
It is funny when you say, I need a solution to this, and you've written so many tools that you can't remember you've already solved it. You just haven't got it in there.
Yeah,
it's even better when it's in your code base, in your current one, and you go to write it. And you're like, oh, wait, this already exists.
I have written the same tool, but called it something different. Like, yeah, this is the so-and-so tool. And I write it. I'm like, that's a great tool. And then I'm putting it into the project and everything and just go, actually, this would be a better name for it. And then go to write the new name. And it's there. It's like, I've already done. I literally done that like 2 days ago with my character controls. I was like, I want to write something this, and then I wrote it. And I was like, written this.
Yeah, at one stage I was writing something, and I got halfway through it, and I'm like, I forgot. This was so easy the last time I did it. I just went and I remembered I had it already. It's like, why did I even half write it again when I know I already have it in my? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, been doing it too long.
Yeah.
Fun stuff. So, Andrew, you got any other tools you wanted to recommend?
I on the asset store besides my own,
or other inside asset store, outside other just stuff that you find to be super helpful for speeding up development.
This is actually a tough one because I don't use as many assets as one would think because I try to produce stuff that
you're a tool developer. You're like us. You just make stuff that you need.
And I do that. Well, that's the thing. Like I created a renaming tool. Again, another one of when you want to ingest a lot of content from the asset store, say particles, and you want to organize them by perhaps what they're from. You want to add a bunch of prefixes to the name or change the camel case to have spaces because you don't need to have camel cases. We live in a modern world where there's room for spaces and all this stuff. And so I built a renaming tool that was super convenient, saved me gobs of time. I've built a tool that lets me select a bunch of things and then build a custom object for the projectile factory because I'll be doing that to 150 things. And turns out it's a lot easier to right click and say, build this for everything. And then it just does that for everything. Tools are wonderful.
You realize you just started a flame war about camel case and all the rest of it, don't you?
Well, I mean, it's not really a flame war because we know that you can have spaces these days. But
look at Jason. I was like, no, God. I can't put spaces in there. The space key is dead to me unless I'm coding.
So much easier to read.
Yeah.
No spaces. Oh,
I
We
still
can
get
put
annoyed,
spaces
though,
and
when-
variable names now and put quotes around them.
quotes and variable names.
There's got to be some language that does that. Put some quotes around your variable names so you can have
You
some
can use
space in
emojis for your variables too. You know.
Okay, neat.
there.
I do get annoyed when I download a script from somebody else, though, and the variable names are all abbreviations of things that they don't need to be.
Oh yes, I hate abbreviations for the most part. I would try to almost never abbreviate because it's always a situation where like you at the time knows what that abbreviation is, but you in the future or somebody else may very well not, and just makes it harder to read and harder to get the context.
Yep.
Unless it's like obnoxiously long and you really have to, or it's super common.
I use abbreviations all the time.
I never use them unless they're very, very obvious and common or just super, super long. So, yeah, I've seen too many of them where people don't know what the code is. They read it and they misthink it's something else, or they can't figure out what it is, or I'm looking at theirs and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I have to go hit F12 and figure out where it's assigned and what IX is, or whatever the variable name is. So, well, yeah, there was one other comment here. I think we can start wrapping stuff up, but there was one more comment from John about writing tools that, spending 8 hours to write a tool that takes you for a task that takes you 5 minutes to do it in the first place. And I used to have up on my wall that really nice chart from Chris of the when you should optimize it based off of how often you do the task and how often it repeats. But it is very, I think, easy to fall into this trap of like, oh, it would be fun. I could just automate that and optimize it and not have to do it again. And I've done that before. Even recently, like in the last week, I've seen scenarios where I was like, okay, I need to go update these 30 things. And I'm like, well, I could just go write something to do it. And I'm like, it's going to take me 3 minutes to update these 30 things and probably 15 minutes to write something to update them and then make sure that it actually did it right. And I'm like, got to stop myself. I don't know. Is this something you guys still struggle with?
I agree on principle, but I think the truth is, if you're doing it long enough, you end up, the time it takes for you to make an automation or a tool gets so short that it's basically a case of like, there's like 7 lines you ever need for dealing with the path system in Windows. There's the same lines for file, the same line for path. And if you're doing the same things every time, you either commit them to memory or you've even wrapped those. So there's a single button. Like, for example, I have a thing that says file.makeBackup. And it does the steps of take file, copy it, put a .back extension, make it invisible, take the other file, return the path of the thing, and now I've got one line that says, before I do an operation, make backup, try to do thing, if fails, restore backup. So like to say, oh, I made a tool and the tool does a backup of the that sounds very complicated. It's now one line for me because I've been doing it often enough, right? So the actual task of making tools gets exponentially shorter the more time you do it, because the more stuff you have to even like tool the tools. And then also finally it just becomes one of those things where over time, you just find yourself knowing in advance the stuff you're going to do, and it just ends up. So I'm not saying it doesn't happen. Like there are times, of course, where I will waste time, or I'll just be enjoying it and I'll do it because I don't care. But on balance, I find myself like it's usually just 3 or 4 lines. I like when we're saying tooling. I really can't stress enough. We're talking about we've hit a problem. Can we write this in under 6 lines? If so, go to the file where we've already got the other extensions, we add the 3 or 4 lines, and then we go back to what we're doing. We're not like tool, pause project, go and spend 3 days planning a thing. That's not really what we're talking about in most cases.
Yeah. I've been 2 things. One, I've been getting faster at writing these now with my friend the AI, and just because I know I'm doing more now. And so it makes a lot more sense. But so I think, if you're spending a long time writing the tool because it's new to you, then it's probably a worthwhile exercise just to learn the thing. But oftentimes the things that you're doing, I'm only doing this 30 times today, I can just quickly do it. Are you going to do that again next month? Are you going to do that again every month? And then you can start thinking about it and being like, okay, maybe this is actually worth some time savings. And then you can build on them. As Jason was saying, he's got this one script that has all these little fancy little things. Just keep adding to it, and then when you need it, it'll be there for you. If you don't forget, of course, that you've already done
and there's other like small tangent on that, which I think is also worth mentioning, is developers suck at usability. across the board. They're more than happy to do things which are good enough. A good example of this is even if you look for tool development and you follow guides, most of them will just do the bare minimum of here is the code that press buttons to make thing. And something that I always appreciated about Dave's channel is he doesn't just make the thing, he makes the thing, puts the exception handler, does the validation that shows the little icon, makes sure that it grays out if it's not representative in this context, and it like he closes the loop. So it's a tool which is actually usable in not more than just like works. And I think more than just learning to do that, that's actually valuable from a usability perspective because a lot of developers kind of forget to do that. And I think separate from the like timing and cost of time or whatever, I think honestly learning to use your own tools gives you a greater appreciation for where pain points are. Because it's so frustrating when I watch a dev I made a little tool that like automatically does some texture thing that does this, this, and this. And then they use their own tool and they go, oh, if I clicked the wrong, let me close it and open it again because the state behind isn't working now because I clicked the wrong thing in the wrong order. And it's like, if you were doing that now, of course it's going to happen. And you think people are just going to be fine with this because people are incapable of picturing things as a consumer of their own work. And so as silly as it sounds, writing tools is going to help you because you'll annoy yourself with your own bad tools and you'll start to learn where you're willing to put up with the impatience. And I think that's a good lesson to have, where if you make a tool, it should be more than just barely functional. It should catch the cases where you forgot to select the thing, or whoops, I accidentally selected too many things. Maybe I should pop up a message and say, warning, don't do that. Or as is mentioned, use the undo feature that is inbuilt into Unity in your tools,
Yeah, I always forget to put the undo in.
Yeah, Jason's story is right. I am the greatest person that ever existed. Yeah, and everybody should just subscribe to the channel. Yeah, and like we were talking about design patterns earlier, knowing how to be a good tools developer is a skill unto itself. Knowing that I want to extract these things out into extension methods. Like I have a massive amount of extension methods on Unity Zone, on my own, and all the rest of it that I can sit there and go, okay, I'm going to do this with the component. And I just have an extension method for it. And Visual Studio gives me a little icon, or Rider gives me a little icon to know that it's mine, not theirs, and that it's doing that. So I can have loads of things in there. Obviously, they don't appear in my video because I'm not going to do a massive amount of that. A lot of times when you see a video that I create and you think, oh, that takes a long time, I'm padding it out with all the stuff. I'm pulling my extension methods and bolting them out into the actual code itself. But a lot of times, as Story says, it's a few lines and you're just burning through this stuff because you've written all those extension methods already. You have those services available and you can just basically bolt them on. And it's experience, as Andrew says. He's completely right. Once you've built enough tools, you know when to make them and when not to make them.
Yeah, like one of the things that I use a lot is the amount of times you want to save configuration. You can store it in player prefs, and we had the whole big there's loads of ways you can do it. But I have a thing called config I use in all of my projects. And then config has various implementations, and the most common one is a JSON config, which just uses JSON.NET, slaps it around a J object, and just lets me do a config file and saves it to a .json. So it's very simple in what it does. But I use it so often when I make a project and I'm like, oh, I want to save these to some configuration file that a customer might be able to change, or a client or whatever, I just write config equals JSON config.default. And it automatically saves in the right section of the app data directory in the right place, creates a file called config.json, sets it up correctly, supports nested stuff. And then when I write things to it, I have an extension method which says take a string, pass it to my encryption thing, and I can do salt hashed encryptions that'll then make sure that if I'm storing a API key to it, it'll not just store the API key, but it'll store it as a salted hash and stuff. Which again, if I was to say, let's sit down and make a thing that does that, that's a lot of work. But the amount of times I'm like, oh, client wants a demo of project that uses this API, I can go, cool, in 7 lines of code, I can make a save, which will have a config, which will have an API key, which is encrypted, and I can continue. So it's all this. It's just like little bits of like, the amount of time really does get a lot shorter the more you've got in your toolbox.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and extension methods are great. When I first learned about those, I was like, what? This is amazing.
They're really addictive as well. Like
you go overboard.
Addictive.
It can get dangerous, yeah.
You got to watch out.
I have caught myself. Like one of them I used to do is I had a set of utility functions for encryption where I had like to base 64 from base 64 string. I had a whole bunch of these, and they were just glorified wrappers around the encoding.utf8 or the convert.to and stuff. And it got to the point where I wanted to share a script with somebody, and I had to now bring in extension tools just because I was wrapping these pointless 1 or 2, and I just ended up hating it so much that I inline them all again. And so now I'm hyper vigilant that I only add them if they are going to be like intrinsically valuable to the tool that they're part of.
The extension method that is 1 line long. What are you doing?
Yeah.
Is it just
And
that you can't remember what the method's called?
Well, one of my favorites is a one-liner that Story introduced. This is when I was first getting my head around them really
Get
well.
or create or something, because that's a common one that
Which
a lot of people get or create if you're doing.
No, just take random.
Take right, sure. But that's not one line. The point we're making, that's not one line behind the scenes. That's like it's kind of conceptually, it's solving a problem of like from this collection, pick one within range of whatever. It's like you could one line it, but yeah.
It's one of those things where I type out the same thing over and over, and turns out if you do it over and over, that's an opportunity for a tool. But I just love that one line replacement with 2 words.
And that's the thing. The when I specify one line, I mean like your extension method calls one method or something else with nothing else around it. Like it's just really a rename.
Yeah, because again, the example I had was like .2 UTF-8 array or something was just calling encoding.utf8.encode thing. So I just like reversed conception. It's like this doesn't need to be a thing. This is like me over engineering a little bit.
And it's also that case of, when people make a class and that class does too many things, well, you're now adding adding extension methods that just add things that shouldn't be in that particular thing as well. That's another one that happens a lot. Don't do it.
Another one that I do like though is the amount of times I see people with a base class. Like one thing I did early in my Unity career stuff is if you're ever doing editor tooling, it becomes a real pain in the ass if you use the native function calls because they're all about 1,000,000 miles long, and five lines can look like a book once you start doing all of the editor layout rubbish, whatever. And so I have utility functions for all of those that turn button into if btn because I'm always writing if button on so many things. I just want it to be the shortest possible statement I can make. But rather than it used to be base classes, and I'd have to extend.
And he's gone.
Oh, I thought it was me.
No. He did get me into, Story got me into doing the custom class for my editor scripts. So my editor scripts are very similar. If button, do thing, and space and stuff, just because I don't want to write the whole whatever.
But the point is that it's an extension. It's an implicit import. Is my point. Is that you can put it at the top, so it still looks like it's a base class, but it's not actually. You don't have to worry about all the other nonsense that comes with it. That to me is a good combination of the two, because you're not like it's not overarching the whole application that like every time this thing is there, this extension method needs to be there. It's just if I have imported this utility at the top, I get the free benefits of the clean code down below, but I have to choose to import it.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we got to start wrapping stuff up for today, but there were a couple things I wanted to just really quickly hit. First, Andrew's got a couple. Well, I really want to find out what everybody else's personal toxic programmer trait is. I saw this comment from Michael. But before that, Andrew's got a couple things up on the asset store that are on sale right now for 50% off, right? And that's in dollars, not cents. Apparently, I forgot the dollar sign. And this is the sound library.
The BAL sound library, Magic Melee, this is basically the 2 sound libraries that I had a human produce years ago. Not too many years ago, but years ago, a human produced these. A lot of the sounds were fully recorded in his kitchen.
Sure, it wasn't an AI going back in time.
I guess that's technically maybe possible. It's just really good sounds, and they work really well together. You can blend them to make combined sounds, and my little audio clip combiner tool is in there so you can actually make variations and not have the exact same sound every time something hits something. You can do that live or create your own clips, and there's all that nice stuff. But then this is the more exciting one, I think. Projectile Factory. It's half off. It's priced here, in my opinion. I think I need to raise the price because $14 is too cheap. But there's now 18, I think, integrations with popular particle packages. So if you have the 2, you can just drag and drop and they just work. And the tool's getting better all the time, and it's being made cooler. And just the other night, somebody from this game master group that I go to was he had used it for the first time, and he was saying how easy it was to get working, and it worked. And then he quickly made a Bezier curve for his laser just by extending the code pretty much, which is exactly the point. So you can do anything you want. So he was able to take it, get a laser from the asset store, make it curve the way he wanted it for his vision, and it took him not long to do it, and it just worked. So
I saw that in the call. So I'm talking about it and covering it. It was nice being back in that call too. It's been a little while since I got to join it. Cool. Yeah, go check those out. They're linked in the description down below and in the chat right there. But before we go, I really liked Michael's comment, and I'm just curious if anybody else has their own. As he said, my personal toxic programmer trait is Yagni. I love adding knobs to code, and all it takes is one time of, I can just change this variable to fit a new effect and usage scenario. It is adding in extra tuning knobs and things that aren't going to be used, which I have definitely done before. I made like full-on settings classes for stuff, and like, okay, we're only going to ever have one setting, and it's never going to change, and these could just be constants. And now I have all this complexity of an object that I can grab. So yeah, I'm curious. Anybody have their own toxic programmer trait that you want to call out?
Mine is, as weird as this sounds, probably research. And what I mean by that is, even if I'm given a very small task, I enjoy knowing every aspect of the task. And so I'll often go on a rabbit hole to learn. Like, for example, I was trying to do a grid system for somebody, and by the end of 3 weeks, I had learned about specifically grid-based compression systems, how to do like 7 different kinds of A-star pathfinding on that grid type. It's like none of these are really needed. It's just once I've decided I'm working on a grid thing, I need to know everything about the possible scenarios, use cases, and stuff. And I'm not going to like make all of them. It's not like I'm building 50 features in. But once I've like opened the Pandora's box of an idea, I like, again, encryption, or if I was doing like text, I was doing text search. I'm like, how does text search work? How does Google do theirs? How does and I suddenly went on like I didn't learn how search engines worked, and I started doing the B25 best match stuff, and then I was doing the phonetic search. Like they don't have a search box, but the minute you ask me the question of can you do a search box, I'm like I could. What would make a good one? And I have to know every part of the problem, and so I have to pull myself back on going make it a research project for later, but that's not actually like focus on the actual task. So yeah, that's mine.
I do that.
That totally fits you. I totally see it. Andrew, you got something?
I don't know if it's toxic necessarily, but it's generally a bad idea. It's over engineering in the sense that with the game that I definitely will make and finish one day, Legend of the Stones, it's coming soon, Q5. I get into the point where I want to build something, and I think, well, I also want to do this, quote unquote, right, and make sure it's good for the future of the game and all that. And also, I would like to sell something on the asset store, try to make some money in the process because I don't have a trust fund yet. And so I will spend a month or two building Projectile Factory when all I really wanted to do was shoot some arrows and fireballs. But now I can shoot arrows and fireballs and anything else. So it's not completely toxic, but if you're really just trying to make a game, focus on that rather than focusing on
and that's the point, right? Because even though it says when I say research, that doesn't sound like a problem. It's like, no, you don't understand. If I said my game has a main menu and then a start screen, it's like, cool, that's our main menu and then a game screen. That's 2 screens. You can make a state for one, state for the other. And I'm like, no. But the way you could do that is you could do it using an activity system which uses intents for distributing that, or maybe you want to make a routing system that matches more. And it's something like I've decided to learn the 15 different ways different categories of software would possibly solve the problem of there are different states of your app. How do you do? And then just because I want to know that options that I can pick the right ones for the thing. So again, it's like I want to. It's like you send me in to like cut something and be like, okay, let me learn how every single sharper tool works and the best case scenarios, and then I'll pick the best one when I'm done. It's like, yeah, but any of them probably would have worked if you just picked one to do it. But no, I had to like. So it is actually a problem, and sometimes I'll have to catch myself and go, set a make sure it's a deadline, make sure depending on who it's for. If it's for me, it's like fine, I don't mind wasting my time. But if it's for somebody else, I have to like lock down as like I have to deliver the thing within a deadline or whatever.
I see other people, engineers, and in non-game dev jobs do a thing that annoys the shit out of me, where they will attempt to use some advanced technology like machine learning or AI to do what you could do if you just asked someone a question. So, for instance, let's say somebody's building a project at Home Depot and they come to the store. These engineers will say, oh, well, let's do a facial recognition, try look them up on the background, see them in our system, see what kind of things they've been building so that we can say, here's a hammer for you, instead of just saying, hey, what are you looking for? What are you doing today? What are you building today?
There's that joke one online where they're talking about someone made the 3-tiered folding coat hanger that you can put into all these like weird edge cases, and then someone just made a video where they just took a normal coat hanger, clipped it, and then just rotated it. It's just like,
Yep. And by the way, the Yagni, I had to look it up, is you aren't gonna need it.
Yes.
I don't know what COBOL means.
Yeah, that's an old programming language. But yes, that phrase really comes around from people engineering things and adding stuff into code in case they need it in the future. Stuff that's not actually needed now, but hey,
like how
later on we might want to change the color of this. So let's make it so we can customize the color of this. And fuck it, well, let's add a whole colors customization service too on a web page.
In fact, the thing you're describing, Andrew, another one is called KISS, which is keep it simple, stupid, and that's to the point of what you were saying.
Yes,
that is probably mine. I've got an over obsession with simplifying things, and when I see layers and abstractions on stuff, I just get irritated nowadays, and I'm like, I wonder if I could just strip that out. Is it actually needed? Yeah, I feel like at least half the time it's not.
Yeah,
Dave.
I will say,
burning everybody's code.
Yeah. Sorry, say that. I lost it. What's my major malfunction? Go on, which one?
I'm waiting to find out. I'm sure it's going to be something terrible.
I don't have one. I'm perfect in every way. I am the Mary Poppins.
Is it having to look at other developers' code?
I am too good that other people just can't. It makes everything stressful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm not gonna argue it. All right. Well, anybody got anything else you wanted to share this week before we wrap it up?
Yeah, go to the Dev Days of Summer thing on Wednesday and watch my video.
Oh yeah, definitely. Let's if we have a link for it, we'll put that down in the description too, right after this.
Yeah, but
as soon as it's ready.
In case folks didn't know, these assets of mine that are on sale right now, if they don't sell well, they won't be on sale after Tuesday. So this is your only chance. But then if everyone goes out and buys it, then maybe it will be on sale next week, just because it was popular enough to stick around. But
so that means you gotta go grab them now while they're half off.
Yeah.
I agree.
Plus,
and then check out.
I really do have to raise the price on Projectile Factory. I think $28 is a little too cheap.
Yeah, well, now it's starting to grow and it's getting a lot of integrations and stuff. I feel like you got to just slowly raise up the price. I feel like that's kind of the way to go. Keep the value or the price matching with the value as stuff keeps getting added.
Yeah,
that's a lot of particle systems it's working with. Just scroll down the list. Cool. All right, Story, you got anything else before we go?
Not just yet, but I will say. Anybody who's in my Discord or isn't yet, feel free to join, because I'm currently working on a few videos at the same time, actually, for something. But I will say I'm currently focused a lot on managers and systems for how people initialize projects. And so if you want your particular project, or the way, if you have questions around your project and how you're dealing with sort of talking between services and systems and managers, if you're in the Discord, you can basically describe your project or give me examples of your code, and you have a much better chance of me directly referencing and helping out with that particular problem, as that's what I'm currently making a video about. So I recommend it, because I'm trying to catch as many edge cases as I can. I've talked to a bunch of people, looked at a bunch of ways to solve various problems, and I'm trying to find the ones I see most and highlight the pros and cons. And so if you're having trouble with like managing the relationship between your managers, your scripts, and whatever, hit me up in the Discord.
Nice, yeah, and that Story was sharing a little bit about what he's working on earlier in the call before the show, and it sounded really interesting. So I'd certainly check that out. If you haven't already joined Story's Discord, it's 1,000 times better than most of them, including mine. I never look at Discord other than Stories and the GameDevShow, and so I say definitely join it. All right. Well, I guess we will be back next Friday. Harrison should be here so we can tear apart the command pattern implementation. If you guys haven't gotten a copy of it yet, I would say just message him, and I'm sure he can set that up, at least get the digital one. And everybody who doesn't have one, here's a link to the book if you want to go check it out on Amazon. It's very interesting, covers a ton of different design patterns, and we're going to be talking about it a little bit over the next couple weeks. It's just talking about different design patterns mixed in with other content and stuff. All right, well, thanks again, everybody. Anybody want to say goodbye? And I'll find a little goodbye button, and we'll disappear somewhere.